political prisoners represent the people who are most militant in their fight for freedom and justice. And that's why they're in prison. That's why they're in prison for so long. And that people need to know that you cannot build a resistance movement if you don't keep in mind the people who most resist.
Norningham is the man that was murdered in Alabama. I was reading Mumia's commentary, and he linked the Klan killings of the beheading of these gay men to what is happening to black people.
Together, freedom, justice, love, cause can break.
The lesbian, gay, transgender movement has been active for as long as I've been active in the movement.
We are in this together. 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 We are in this together.
Welcome to the Battle for Progressive Media. Tonight's show is a special collaboration between Out FM and the Battle for Progressive Media. Out FM is a progressive lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender news, culture, and activist hour on listener-sponsored, non-commercial WBAI New York, part of the Pacifica Radio Network. The Battle for Progressive Media is a program that is broadcast on Manhattan Neighborhood Network and looks into media issues and the exclusion of progressives from the media and attempts for progressive outlets to expand their reach. On tonight's show, we'll have a special focus on Out FM because it's a good show that talks about issues that are rarely talked about even in the gay and lesbian media. The song you just heard was Together by Betty. It's Out FM's theme music. I'm today's host, John Riley. WBAI Radio just finished its spring membership drive, which you will know if you are already a listener to WBAI. If you haven't become a member of WBAI yet, I strongly encourage you to become a member. For only $25, you'll support the station and you'll have voting rights in the upcoming fall election, which will determine new leadership for the local station board and also for the Pacifica National Board that governs the 5-station network. If you are not a member of BAI and you've never heard of WBAI, you have a treat in store for you. I strongly encourage you to set your alarm clock to wake you on 99.5 FM every day. WBAI has some of the most unique programming in the New York City area. It's community radio at its finest, and it has incredible variety that you would not expect on any other radio station. Monday through Friday, you'll hear an excellent morning public affairs program called Wake Up Call that brings to you activists, organizers, artists, and intellectuals to talk about current events. At 9 o'clock, you'll hear a nationally broadcast program, Democracy Now! So it's one of my favorite programs. So be sure to set your radio alarm clock to go off on 99.5 FM. Out FM producer Brad Taylor and I bring you a special report on the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal and the participation of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgender people in the movement to secure him a new trial. Mumia Abu-Jamal is a 52-year-old former Black Panther who began his career in journalism reporting for a newspaper, for the Black Panther Party newspaper in Philadelphia. The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was a militant group of blacks inspired by Malcolm X, Che Guevara, Francis Fanon, Mao Zedong, and other revolutionary currents of its era. The Black Panthers organized voter fund drives and community patrols of their neighborhoods to fight the brutality of police that were attacking black people. The Black Panthers had a 10-point program that included land, peace, bread, and self-determination for their communities. Mumia Abu-Jamal later reported for a variety of radio stations in the Philadelphia area, and he had a particular focus on the issues of the poor and the oppressed, with a special emphasis on police brutality. As a result, he was hated by the Philadelphia police force, which was considered corrupt even by the Justice Department.
Rainbow Flags for Mumia was a way to have build a contingent, a base of LGBT peoples and an organization for Mumia Abu-Jamal.
White on the trigger.
I'm here, I'm a fag against the system from Syracuse, New York, and I'm here to fight for Mumia's freedom, Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's been locked up by this racist, corrupt system for over 25 years, and they're trying to kill Mumia, and as a queer person, fighting for not only Mumia's freedom, but queer folks' liberation, and against all the injustices of the system. I'm here to show Mumia support because all our struggles are interconnected, all our struggles are linked, and we got to get our resistance together.
Because I feel that Mumia was unjustly framed, and that if we don't defend the equality and the innocence of all people, like, this trial is obviously very, very racist, and the police in this town are very, very racist. If we don't defend that, even though it's not our own personal issue, because obviously we're white, but it's like it doesn't affect us directly, but we have to defend all people if we're going to defend ourselves.
The court could, and if they did, Mumia would be dead in a relatively short period of time. So very much is at stake. And the city will burn.
Lynching comes in subtle flavor, drugs and guns and heavy labor. Well, you might get parole or a PhD with selectively doled out opportunity, bought and sold for centuries. Freedom comes, but it ain't free.
That song was The Devil's Henchman by Pamela Means. On March 17th, 2007, between 500 and 700 activists gathered for a demonstration outside of the Philadelphia Court of Appeals. While inside, activists and luminaries listened to the arguments of Mumia Abu-Jamal's defense attorney, who was trying desperately to save his client's life, and also hearing the arguments of the prosecution, which after 25 years was still attempting to send Mumia to the death chamber. In the next segment, we're going to hear from Imani Henry. Imani Henry is a transgender activist and radical organizer, and we'll discuss Rainbow Flags for Mumia, a project to organize lesbian and gay folks to build support for Mumia's case.
Rainbow Flags for Mumia is one facet of organizing that was started in 1999 around Millions for Mumia. There were Asians for Mumia, workers for Mumia, Latinos from Mumia and Rainbow Flags from Mumia was a way to have build a contingent, a base of LGBT peoples and an organization for Mumia Abu-Jamal. And really, truthfully, there's always been LGBT activism inside the Mumia movement. You know, queers in solidarity with political prisoners. Quis was from back in the day, at the very heart and beginning of Mumia's case. There have been LGBT organizers that have worked on not only his case but other political prisoners' cases from since the 80s, from the 70s. We've always been a part of it, and Rainbow Flags for Mumia was just again another step. And really, one of the first times that there was an open sort of national mobilization around Mumia in the LGBT movement. So from that moment, we've had feeder marches in the Castro at Madison Square Theater. We sold out seats. We called for seats of LGBT people, and people sold out our section. We bought ads, you know, in the program book, 4 pages full of ads, all LGBT names. Everyone from at this point Senator Tom Duane, who was asked to speak, didn't speak, but he showed up and was there. Margaret Gomez was on the stage. Minnie Bruce Pratt. You know, it's just amazing. You know, and activists and young people of all LGBT folks that participated, you know, in events. Students, I mean, I think of a whole class, Antioch, Evergreen, a lot of their students were LGBT folks. They brought, you know, made sure that Mumia was their keynote. So anyway, this is the whole legacy, and to this moment, still trying to galvanize folks to come out from Mumia as much as possible. Because truthfully, when everything is said and done, I mean, who else knows about persecution and discrimination and based on who we are? I mean, Mumia was targeted because he's a Black Panther, because he was a writer and journalist against police brutality. LGBT people were targeted for who we love, who we are all the time. We face police brutality and repression just on the basis of who we are. And I think, you know, it's interesting, even in this mobilizing for this moment, all these trans folks, a lot of the names are trans people. And I mean, I think that definitely as a trans man, the trans community has always been we're for Mumia. It's just it's a no-brainer. It's who we are.
Next, Leilani Dowell from FIST talks about why she and her organization support Mumia Abu-Jamal.
We're nearing the end of Mumia's appeals process. These are some of his last hearings, and you know, we think that it's so important that we rally around the case of Mumia. We know that, you know, there's a legal struggle going on inside, but it's really a political struggle, and it's really going to take the political movement that's going to free him. And so we mobilized as many people as possible. We have 2 buses that came from New York City. We had an open call that went out around the Rainbow Flags from Mumia, and so, you know, I think there's a really strong turnout because we realize that it's getting, more than ever, his case is getting critical. You know, it's nearing that point. So, well, Rainbow Flags from Mumia is a campaign that was started actually quite a while ago to show that the lesbian, gay, bi, and trans community was in support of Mumia's case. Mumia has spoken in favor of LGBT rights for years, and you know, more than anything, just to show that, you know, the LGBT community sees the links between the repression of you know, queer LGBT people and the repression that happens to people of color, the police brutality that happens against, you know, the gay bashings that happen by the police, and the gay bashing, or excuse me, and the bashings that happen against people of color on the streets of every city in this country. And so it was kind of making those links and bringing together the struggle to support Mumia.
Out FM producer Brad Taylor interviews radical activist and lawyer Joan Gibbs about the importance of supporting political prisoners.
Your name?
My name is Joan Gibbs. Well, I've been a long-time supporter of Mumia. I've just worked with the New York City Free Mumia Coalition, and I'm a member of the Jericho movement.
Do you feel optimistic about the chances for a retrial?
Yes, I feel optimistic about the chances for a retrial. I mean, clearly the legal issues in this case are very, very substantial legal questions are being presented. No federal court has ever really heard these issues before. The issue that I'm most familiar with is the Batson claim, which is a claim around the composition of the jury. And I think that's a very strong claim. I think he has some other claims. And I think really the question is not so much that he's a retrial, but that Mumia is innocent and he should be freed. But of course that we know it might not necessarily happen, but that's what should happen. And absent of that, then he should have a retrial.
Do you know how many of Mumia's supporters have been able to get into the courtroom?
Well, I don't know, probably about 25, 30, maybe higher than that. The Court of Appeals traditionally are not big courts. The trial courts is the bigger courts. The Court of Appeals are very small, as is, if you've ever been to the Supreme Court of the United States, it's very small. They were not constructed so that people could come to hear the arguments, because it's usually a thing that lawyers go to appellate arguments, you know.
Can you talk about the intersection of the movement to free Mumia with other freedom struggles with which you're familiar and which Mumia in his various commentaries has widely addressed?
Well, I think it's not so much a question of the struggle to free Mumia, it's a question of the struggle to free political prisoners and other movements. And Mumia being the most prominent political prisoner and being on death row heightens his case and the struggle around it. But the whole question of this relationship between other movements that are going on simultaneously. One of the things that I'm going to be speaking at the Lesbian Gay Community Center in June, I think it's June 2nd, on the Rainbow Solidarity for the Cuban Five. And around that, they've built a whole campaign, particularly reaching out to people who are active in the women's movement, the lesbian gay movement, and to speak about and link up those issues. So, of course, there are people in prison who come out of those movements, who come out of the lesbian gay movement, who come out of the black movement, and so there's a natural linkage. Women's movement, people who are associated with these movements, and all of those movements then have an interest in freeing not only their prisoners, but the broader question is political prisoners represent the people who are most militant in their fight for freedom and justice, and that's why they're in prison, and that's why they're in prison for so long, and that people need to know that you cannot build a resistance movement if you don't keep in mind the people who most resist, because that, if you abandon, I see it a question of me working to free my comrades, many of which them are. And I couldn't very easily just be going on about my business as if they were, not in jail. And if you look around the world, every movement, like if you look at the ANC in South Africa and the whole struggle around the freeing of Nelson Mandela, that one of the main demands of the ANC in the late 80s was not only the freedom of Mandela, but to free all the political prisoners. And in fact, Mandela stayed in prison until that they had assured that the rest of them would be released. So that's a question that every movement must take up, the question of political prisoners. And in the black movement in particular, we have an enormous number of political prisoners, most New Africans and black people, but we also have anti-imperialist whites who are in prison because of their solidarity with the black movement, such as Marilyn Buck, who's serving 60 years allegedly for her involvement in the freeing of Assata Shakur, which is like a heroic act that our movement, still celebrates. And she's in jail in California. People barely talk about Marilyn Buck,
And the South African revolutionary struggle and the ANC didn't shy away from gay struggle also.
They did not. As a matter of fact, I don't know, it's just sort of, there's a book that came out in South Africa about desire. It's called I can't remember the title, but Desire is in the title, and it describes the whole struggle around lesbians and gay rights within the context of the ANC and within the broader anti-apartheid struggle there. That I highly recommend people read if they can find it. I think it's probably still available, because they had a article in there about the brother who you're probably familiar with, Simon, who subsequently died. You know who I'm talking about. Simon Nkoli, who subsequently has died of AIDS, but he was very involved in the ANC.
So how do you feel about the status of things around the world and in the States in terms of the intersectionality and the coalescing of these various movements? Do you think things are moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I think things are moving in the right direction. I think in terms of the time, over the period of time that I've been involved in the movement, I first came involved in the movement in the late 60s, an anti-war movement. And I think between then and now, that issues around gender and sexuality people's consciousness around those issues have been raised tremendously. And so that it's not, people feel comfortable coming to demonstrations, being a part of demonstrations, speaking out in demonstrations.
Well, thanks very much for talking to us. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We're joined today with Suzanne Ross, longtime radical anti-racist activist and current organizer in the Free Mumia Abu-Jamal Coalition here in New York City. Welcome to the Battle for Progressive Media, Suzanne.
Thank you for having me on.
Mumia Abu-Jamal is a prisoner on death row accused of killing a police officer. His investigative reports into police misconduct, especially their treatment of a small radical and predominantly black movement called MOVE, infuriated the police department. In a nutshell, can you talk about how Mumia came to be charged with murdering police officer Faulkner?
In December 1981, Mumia was moonlighting as a cab driver. He had 3 kids and he was supplementing his income, which was limited obviously, as a journalist. He was driving by at about 3 a.m. On 13th and Locust in Philadelphia, saw a cop beating up a black man and went to check it out, being who he is and who he always was. This was of concern to him, and lo and behold, it turned out to be his brother who was being beaten up. What follows was that Mumia was very, very badly beaten. He almost died himself. And the descriptions by some of the people who saw what happened was that he was beaten mercilessly and miraculously survived. And the policeman who was beating up Mumia's brother was killed. And in the ensuing chaos of people running away and Mumia's brother having had somebody else in his car, there was a passenger in Mumia's car, and all kinds of things that would raise much question and would lead to investigation if this was a serious crime investigation. The police never investigated any other possibility, immediately came to the conclusion and had a campaign in the media that it was Mumia who killed the cop and that Mumia deserved to be executed. And lo and behold, a kangaroo court was held, and in no time, Mumia was found guilty and sentenced to death. There was no paraffin test, the usual tests of whether the person who allegedly used a gun, whether there was any guns, traces of the use of the gun on his hands. None of that was done. The site wasn't secured. Literally no other witness was considered for any kind of investigation. So we know this was a railroading and that they had their chance. They found the moment when they can get someone whom you pointed out they hated. And they had promised, particularly the notorious Mayor Rizzo, who had been the police chief before, had promised that he would get back at Mumia. He threatened him at a press conference, looked at him straight in the eye, and he said, we're not going to forget what you've done. We're not going to let you go. Basically, I don't remember the exact words. But if you see that video, it is very threatening. So they did what they set out to do, and the apparatus, the whole government apparatus and police apparatus and judicial apparatus, all aspects of the system of Philadelphia was so complicit in crime and racism and in cronyism and in a level of corruption that even the Justice Department ultimately found unacceptable, the U.S. Justice Department, and took took the police department under receivership, which means they were controlled by the U.S. Justice Department. That was the level of question that even a corrupt U.S. government found intolerable.
It's been 24 years since Mumia's conviction. His lawyers recently presented his case to a federal appellate court in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. This was on May 17th. What were the issues at stake?
The issues were at stake were one was about the issue of the death penalty itself, whether the judge in the case had appropriately presented the options available to the jurors for life in prison without parole versus the death penalty. And there's been a pretty strong consensus that the judge had misled the jurors and had presented the case as though mitigating circumstances, which are known to be a major factor in reviewing a death sentence, what the role of mitigating factors was. And the way the judge presented it, he made it seem like the jurors would have to be unanimous on any of the mitigating circumstances in order for that to be considered. And that's not true. There was no requirement of unanimity, and they certainly had that option, which was essentially denied them. So that questions the sentence itself. The more serious question for Mumia, because we do not want life in prison without parole for Mumia. Mumia is an innocent man and he should be out. So the question of a new trial is really what's the most serious issue for Mumia and for us. And in terms of a new trial, there are a few issues, but the most powerful one, and the one that has the greatest number of precedents in terms of overturning a guilt sentence, is what's called the Batson issue. And that refers to racial bias in jury selection. And if you can prove, according to the United States Supreme Court, a ruling in 1986, on what was called the Batson case, if you can prove that there was racial bias in jury selection, you are automatically entitled to a new trial or release. And in Mumia's case, there's overwhelming evidence of racial bias in the jury selection. I mean, with everything I've just said as an introduction to what we're talking about, and the statistics, the number of black jurors who were rejected from the jury versus the number of white jurors, the kinds of questions that were posed to black jurors versus white jurors. And even once jurors were selected, for example, the original forewoman, person who was going to be play this key role of the forewoman of the jury, was a black woman. She asked to be released one day to take care of a sick cat. I believe it was just for an afternoon. The judge said no. She left, took care of business, was dismissed from the jury altogether. Instead, a white man who had said he could not be fair because he had a long history of relationship with the police department, I think he had quite a few relatives in the police department, ended up being the foreman. And when he asked to be released for a whole day to take care of some business, he was granted that. So the unequal treatment of jurors was very, very significant. Well, they certainly are swayed by public opinion. We know that the ethos of a particular period very much defines what the courts do. Even the Supreme Court of the United States is very influenced and often tails after where the consciousness of the people is. So keeping the issue of Mumia alive in these next few months is absolutely critical. The judges need to know that the whole world is watching.